In this series we're going to go through voice billing in Sonar. So this is a feature that we have in Sonar to allow you to bill for voice services and to bill for outbound and inbound phone calls. So let's go through some initial setup. Under the System menu and then under Voice we have three options here: DIDs, rate centers, and voice providers, and we're going to start with rate centers. Now, a rate center may not be applicable to you if you're only selling voice over IP services. You may not need to separate your DIDs geographically. So if you don't, or you don't know what a rate center is, you probably don't need to deal with it. We just need one to put all of our DIDs in. So we're just going to create one here and call it default rate center. If you do have to manage rate centers for your voice services, then you can create them all here and be able to add DIDs to them individually. Okay, so we've made our first rate center. We're going to go ahead and add some DIDs. So a DID is essentially, for all intents and purposes, a phone number. So when you buy a bunch of DIDs from your upstream provider, if you're selling something like voice over IP, then they probably sell you blocks of DIDs that you can then assign to your customers. So we have two ways of getting DIDs in here. We can create them one at a time, or we can import them from a CSV. Most cases you're going to have a lot of DIDs. You probably want to import them. For the purpose of this video, I'm just going to add a couple through here. So when we add a DID, we pick the rate center it's going in, and then I'm going to enter the phone number with the area code. And something to bear in mind here, right now we only support 10-digit DIDs. This would be in a North American numbering plan. So if you're in a different country and you want to do some voice billing, let us know. We can talk to you about what that would take. Okay, let's just add one more. And so now you can see I have a couple of DIDs here, and they're set to my default rate center, and down below I can see I have two available out of a total of two. If I was to assign these to customers, this would reduce this amount. I can always go look at a DID and it will tell me what rate center it's on, what the DID is, if it's currently assigned to a customer, and then there'll be a history for that DID of which account it was on what day and time, and when it was removed. Okay, last thing we're going to do in this video is set up a voice provider. So a voice provider is going to be somebody that provides you with the ability to route out your phone calls. So let's say, for example, you use a company like FlowRoute or Vitality or somebody else that's selling you SIP connectivity, and you're using that to route out phone calls for your customers. This would be where we can define that provider, upload a rate deck from them, and then be able to set rates for outbound calls internationally and for long distance and things like that. So let's go ahead and create a voice provider. All we need is a name. I'm going to put FlowRoute in here, but you'd put whichever one you're using. You can also have multiple voice providers here, so if you have 2 or 3 different providers that you send calls through, and you're going to import call records from all of those providers into Sonar, we can add them all here. Last thing we do with a voice provider is go into View. This takes us into the management page for the voice provider, and we can then import a rate deck. So typically these providers will give you a rate deck on some kind of regular interval. It might be daily, weekly, monthly, or something different, but every time you get one you can come in here and import it, and this will let you take in the rates for every destination. So whether they're calling internationally to different countries, or you may have a number of prefixes in different countries that you want to import, we can bring them in here so that we can identify where customers are calling, and then we can charge them a specific rate based on that destination. So what we need to do here is pick a rate deck and then define, and it needs to be in a CSV, so a comma separated format, and then we define in that CSV which column is the name. So this would be something like United Kingdom, Australia, or the Bahamas or something like that. The column that has the prefix, so this would be a set of numbers at the beginning. So for example, any number that begins with 44 is being dialed to the UK, but you may also have more specific prefixes, like maybe 441 is mobile calls and 442 is something different. And then we have a rate column, and this is what the rate is per minute for calls to that prefix. So typically this rate is the rate you're being charged, but you probably want to increase that. So we can increase that by adding a minimum rate and a percentage increase. If we set a minimum rate, then any increase by the percentage set in the percentage increase field that doesn't take us above our minimum rate will instead be the minimum rate. So let's say, for example, one of the prefixes in your rate deck charges a penny a minute. and you have a percentage increase of 40%. Well, maybe you don't want to charge that low of an amount for any calls. You want your minimum to be, let's say, 5 cents a minute. So in that case, I could put 5 cents in here, 40% increase, and then Sonar will run through my whole rate deck, increase every rate by 40%, and if that increase doesn't take us above 5 cents, it'll set the rate to 5 cents. So this is really all there is to our initial setup. It's pretty simple. We get some DIDs in, we set up our voice providers and our rates and our rate centers, and then we're going to move on to associating some DIDs to customer accounts, creating our actual voice services we're going to sell, and then importing a CDR to rate.